I was at that cozy little dive bar downtown when I first bumped into Alex. My friend, Jess, dragged me there after work, promising it'd be a chill night. Little did I know, it would change everything. "Come on, Tasha, it'll be fun. Plus, you need to get out more," Jess had insisted, her arm looped through mine as we navigated through the crowded space, filled with the hum of conversations and the occasional clink of glasses. I was scanning the room, taking in the mismatched furniture and dim lighting, when I accidentally collided with someone. "Watch where you're going," I blurted out, before even looking up. "Sorry about that," a deep, amused voice responded. It was Alex. His apology came with a grin that, despite my irritation, I found disarmingly charming. Jess, ever the social butterfly, jumped in. "Oh, hey Alex. Didn't know you hung out here too. This is my friend I've been telling you about." Alex extended his hand, still smiling. "Nice to meet you, I'm Alex. Seems like fate's got a funny way of introducing us." I shook his hand, feeling a weird mix of annoyance and curiosity. "I'm Tasha. I'm sure fate's got better things to do," I retorted, trying to match his casual demeanor. We found a table, and the night unfolded with laughter and stories. Alex worked as a manager at a car company, a job that seemed to suit his confident, easygoing nature. "You gotta roll with the punches, you know? Can't let the small stuff get you down," he said at one point, shrugging off a question about work stress. I talked about my job as a kindergarten teacher, how every day was a mix of chaos and joy. Kids are brutally honest, no filters whatsoever. "But it's refreshing, keeps you grounded," I explained. As the night wore on, I found myself drawn to Alex's straightforwardness and sense of humor. He didn't mince words, and neither did I. It was comfortable talking to him. "You two seem to hit it off," Jess teased, nudging me as Alex went to grab us another round of drinks. "I guess he's not too bad," I conceded, watching him navigate through the crowd with an ease that seemed to come naturally to him. When Alex returned, he handed me a beer, our fingers brushing slightly. "Thought you might like this one. It's my favorite." "Thanks," I said, taking a sip. It was good, actually. "So, what's a car company manager doing in a dive bar like this? Shouldn't you be at some fancy cocktail place?" Alex laughed, a genuine, hearty sound. "Nah, this is more my speed. Real people, real conversations. None of that pretentious crap." The night ended with promises to meet up again, no specifics, just a mutual understanding that we'd both like that. As Jess and I walked back to her car, she nudged me. "See? I told you it'd be fun." And we didn't disappoint her by getting married 6 months later. After 5 years of trying and failing to start a family, life decided to throw us another curveball. My father-in-law, the one person in Alex's family who'd always been kind to me, passed away. That left Eleanor, my mother-in-law, all alone in that big, creaky mansion of hers. Alex thought it'd be a good idea to move in with her. "It's the right thing to do," he'd said one night, trying to sound convincing. "She's all alone now, and we can save some money on rent." I wasn't buying it. "Live with Eleanor? Are you out of your mind? She's made it pretty clear she can't stand me," I shot back, frustration boiling over. Our apartment might have been cramped, but it was our space, free from judgmental glares and snide remarks about my inability to conceive. Alex sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I know it's not ideal, but she's my mom and she needs us. Plus, we're barely scraping by as it is." I knew he was right about the money, but the thought of facing Eleanor's cold shoulder every day was like agreeing to live in a lion's den. "Fine," I finally agreed, but the minute she starts in on me about not having kids, I'm not holding back. The day we moved in, Eleanor greeted us with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome," she said, her voice as chilly as the drafty halls of the mansion. "I suppose we'll have to make do with each other." "Thanks, Mom. We really appreciate it," Alex replied, ever the diplomat. I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The first few weeks were tough. Eleanor made no secret of her displeasure at having me around. "You're doing it all wrong," she'd snipe as I tried to navigate my way around the kitchen or tidy up the living room. Her words were like barbs, each one a reminder that I was an outsider in her world. One evening, as I was attempting to make dinner, Eleanor came in, watching me like a hawk. "You're cutting the vegetables too big," she commented, her voice dripping with disdain. I clenched the knife a little tighter, my patience wearing thin. "Well, Eleanor, why don't you show me how it's done, then? Since you're the expert," I shot back, the words bitter on my tongue. She huffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "I shouldn't have to. A proper wife would know how to do these things." That was the last straw. "Look, I'm here because your son asked me to be, not because I enjoy your company. So, how about you back off and let me cook?" Eleanor looked taken aback, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, but then she turned on her heel and left the kitchen, muttering something about ungrateful children. A few months into our living arrangement with Eleanor, Alex hit me with a bombshell over breakfast. "I've been thinking, maybe you should quit your job and stay home," he said, not meeting my eye. I almost choked on my coffee. Quit my job? Why on earth would I do that? He shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. "Well, with Mom's health and all, we need someone to take care of her. And the house. It's a lot, and hiring a nurse plus a housekeeper? That's gonna drain us dry." I was floored. "So, you want me to become what? A full-time maid and nurse?" The thought of leaving my job, the kids I taught, it felt like he was asking me to give up a part of myself. "It's not like that," Alex protested. "It's just temporary. Until we figure something else out." I spent days mulling over it, arguing back and forth. In the end, the financial logic won out, but it felt like defeat. "Fine, I'll do it. But this is temporary, right?" I said, the word temporary tasting bitter. Transitioning from a kindergarten teacher to a full-time housewife was rough. I missed the chaos of the classroom, the joy of seeing a child's eyes light up when they learned something new. Instead, I found myself knee-deep in laundry, dust, and the endless task of trying to please Eleanor. At first, Eleanor seemed to take a perverse pleasure in critiquing my every move. "You're not cleaning that right," she'd say, watching me struggle with the ancient vacuum cleaner that seemed to cough dust rather than collect it. Or during dinner, "This chicken is dry. Didn't your mother teach you how to cook?" I bit my tongue, reminding myself this was all temporary. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted. Maybe it was the day Eleanor found me crying over a burnt casserole, or maybe she just got tired of eating poorly seasoned food, but she started to soften. "Here, let me show you how to make my meatloaf," she offered one day, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. Alex always loved it as a boy. Cooking with Eleanor was a revelation. Under her guidance, I started to actually enjoy it. We found common ground in the kitchen, of all places. I even began reading to her, newspapers at first, then novels. Our conversations grew, branching out from the mundane to the personal. I learned about Alex as a child, about my father-in-law, about the history of the family I'd married into. I thought Alex would be pleased to see his mother and me getting along. Instead, he seemed more distant. "That's great," he'd say, barely looking up from his phone when I told him about Eleanor's stories from his childhood, or the new recipe we'd mastered together. It was like he was there, but not really. "Don't you care that your mom and I are finally getting along?" I asked him one night, frustration boiling over. He looked up, surprised. "Of course, I do. It's just, work's been crazy. You know how it is." But I didn't, not really. Our worlds were drifting apart, him with his late nights, and me with my days filled with cleaning, cooking, and caring for Eleanor. His detachment stung, a reminder of the gap that had opened up between us, a gap that no amount of housework or caregiving seemed able to bridge. As time went on, I couldn't help but notice Alex's behavior changing. He started coming home later and later, always saying work was to blame. "It's just slammed at the office," he'd tell me, barely looking up from his dinner. It wasn't just the late nights, though. He began sleeping in the spare room, claiming he didn't want to disturb me with his restless nights. Then there was Sarah, Alex's sister, who seemed to enjoy poking fun at me whenever she visited. "Nice place you've got here. Fits you perfectly, old and kinda sad," she'd say with a snicker, glancing around the mansion with disdain. Every time she showed up, it was like she had a sixth sense for when we were struggling the most. "Mum, I need some money," she'd demand, not even a hello. And like clockwork, Eleanor would open her purse, no questions asked. Eleanor's health was on a steady decline, and one day, it hit a new low. She couldn't even get herself into the bath. She called for Sarah, who was over at the time, but all she got was a cold shoulder. "I'm not here to bathe you, Mother." "Figure it out," Sarah snapped, before storming out. Hearing the hurt in Eleanor's voice as she cried broke something in me. I found her in her room, tears streaming down her face. "I'll help you," I said softly, putting aside the years of tension between us. From that day on, our relationship took a turn I never expected. She started opening up, treating me more like a daughter than an unwanted guest. Amidst all this, Alex dropped another bombshell: he'd bought an apartment near his work. "It's easier with the late hours. Saves me the commute," he explained one evening, almost as an afterthought. Curious, I asked to see it. "Can I visit? Just to see where you're staying?" His reaction was swift and sharp. "It's just a basic place, nothing to see. Not a museum." The real kicker came from Eleanor, of all people. One quiet afternoon, she pulled me aside, her voice barely above a whisper. "He bought that apartment with my money. Put it in my name, too. Even the utility bills come out of my account." I was stunned. How had things gotten to this point? The man I gave up my career for was leading a double life funded by his mother. And here I was, caught in the middle of a family I was trying to fit into, now bound by secrets and lies. The mansion, once a symbol of decay and neglected history, began its transformation on a chilly morning that promised change. I had spent countless nights researching, planning, and dreaming. The thought of Sarah's mocking words spurred me on, igniting a fire within me to prove her wrong. I approached Eleanor with my proposal, armed with sketches and color swatches. "Eleanor, I've been thinking," I started, hesitating only for a moment. "The house, it's beautiful, but it could use some love. What do you say we give it a bit of a facelift?" Eleanor peered at me over her reading glasses, the corners of her mouth twitching. "You want to fix up this old place?" she asked, skepticism woven through her words. "Yes, I think it could really brighten things up. Make it feel more like a home again," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. To my surprise, Eleanor warmed to the idea. "Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to freshen things up a bit. Lord knows it's been ages since anything new happened around here." Encouraged by her agreement, I threw myself into the work. The days blurred into a symphony of paint splatters, wallpaper glue, and the screech of sandpaper against wood. Eleanor would often sit by, watching as I transformed her home, piece by piece. Sometimes, she'd even offer a tip or two, her tone softer, almost nostalgic. Back in my day, we would have chosen a more subdued color. "But I must admit, this brightness brings a certain life to the room," Eleanor commented one afternoon as I stepped back to admire the newly painted living room walls. Eleanor couldn't hide her delight. She started inviting her old friends over, showing off the renovations with a pride I hadn't seen in her before. "Look what my daughter has done," she'd boast, her arm around me. It was the first time she'd ever referred to me that way in public, and it warmed my heart. Alex, however, was less than pleased. On one of his rare visits from his apartment, he walked around the house with a frown, inspecting my handiwork like a disapproving inspector. "What have you done to my house?" he finally exploded, anger in his voice. You think you can just take over? Before I could respond, Eleanor intervened. This is still my house, and I say it's never looked better. She's done what none of us bothered to do for years, she declared, her voice sharp, leaving no room for argument. Alex's anger faltered under his mother's gaze, and without another word, he turned and left, the echo of his departure hanging heavy in the air. In the silence that followed, Eleanor turned to me, her expression softening. Don't mind him. He doesn't understand. But I do. Thank you. The mansion's transformation was more than just a change of scenery, it was a rebirth, for the house and for us. In repairing its walls, I had somehow begun to mend the fabric of our family, weaving Eleanor and me closer together. The day Eleanor fell ill, everything changed. The doctors said it was a stroke, and suddenly, the mansion felt more like a tomb than a home. I was there, every day, at the hospital, holding her hand, talking to her even when she couldn't respond. Alex? Sarah? They were nowhere to be seen. It was as if they couldn't be bothered, their own mother lying there, a shadow of her former self. When Eleanor finally came home, it was a bittersweet victory. She was bedridden, a mere whisper of the formidable woman she once was. That's when Alex and Sarah decided to show up, not out of concern, but greed. I overheard them one day, in the drawing room, voices low but greedy. The house should go to me, Alex was saying. I'm the eldest. It only makes sense. Sarah snorted. You think I'm just going to step aside? She promised me the jewelry, the antiques. I've got plans for those. Their mother, their own flesh and blood, was lying helpless, not 10 feet away, and here they were, divvying up her possessions like vultures circling a carcass. Fury boiled inside me. I stormed into the room, unable to hold back. How dare you? She's still here, still fighting, and this is how you honor her? By fighting over her things like she's already gone? They turned to me, surprise and irritation flashing in their eyes. This is family business, Alex snapped. Stay out of it. Sarah just sneered. What would you know about it? You're just the help. But I wasn't just the help. I was the one who stayed by Eleanor's side, the one who cared. So, I did what they couldn't. I took care of her, day and night. I learned how to do the exercises the physiotherapist recommended, gently coaxing her limbs to move. I massaged her stiff muscles, encouraging circulation, whispering encouragement as if my words could heal. And slowly, miraculously, Eleanor began to improve. First, it was a flicker of movement, then a mumbled word. Days turned into weeks, and she started eating on her own, taking shaky steps around her room. Alex and Sarah couldn't hide their disappointment, their greedy plans crumbling as Eleanor regained her strength. I don't understand, Alex muttered one day, watching his mother navigate the hallway with her walker. I thought the doctor said. They underestimated her. I cut in, not bothering to hide my disdain. Seems like you did, too. Eleanor, for her part, seemed to thrive on proving them wrong. With every step, every word, she reclaimed a piece of herself that had been lost to the stroke. And I, who had once felt like an outsider in this family, found a sense of purpose and belonging I hadn't known I was missing. And then the unexpected happened, a second stroke, and Eleanor passed away. The day of the funeral was draped in a somber gray, the sky mourning Eleanor as much as any of us. The service had just ended, the air still thick with grief and whispered condolences, when Alex made his entrance. Not alone, but with a woman clutching his arm and 2 young children in tow. The whispers grew louder, curiosity and shock mingling in the air. This is Marissa, my wife, and these are our kids. Alex introduced them, his voice devoid of the hesitation I'd expected. My world, already unsteady from loss, seemed to tilt further. Your wife? I echoed, the words bitter on my tongue. And you think you can just waltz back here and take over? Alex's gaze was defiant. This is my family's home. We belong here. Sarah's laughter cut through the tension. Looks like you're out, dear. Mum's money, the house, It's all going to be properly managed now. Their audacity left me reeling, but I was spared from responding by the arrival of the notary, a briefcase in hand. If I may, it's time to read Eleanor's will. We gathered in the living room, the very heart of the mansion Eleanor had loved so dearly. The air was thick with anticipation and, on my part, a sliver of hope. Alex and Sarah were smirking, confident in their victory, until the notary's words shattered their expectations. To my daughter-in-law, who has shown me more kindness and love than I could have ever expected, I leave my entire estate, including the mansion and all financial assets. The room went silent. Alex's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before, while Sarah's mouth hung open in disbelief. "This can't be right," Alex exploded. "She's manipulated everything." Sarah chimed in, her voice shrill. "You're nothing but a con artist." The notary, unfazed, pressed a button on a small device he'd pulled from his briefcase. Eleanor's voice filled the room, her image appearing on a screen. "I've made my decision with a clear mind," she said, looking directly into the camera. "My son and daughter have been absent, concerned more with what they could inherit than with me. But she has been by my side, caring, loving. She is my family." The video left Alex and Sarah speechless, their accusations dying on their lips. The revelation of Eleanor's true feelings, her acknowledgement of my loyalty and care, was a vindication I hadn't known I needed. Alex, defeated and angry, stormed out, Marissa and the children trailing behind him. Sarah, her dreams of wealth evaporated, slinked away without another word. The mansion, once a battleground of wills and familial duty, was now truly mine. But it felt hollow without Eleanor. I wandered its halls, her words echoing in my heart. She is my family. Starting fresh, right after the will reading that flipped my world upside down, I didn't waste any time. I filed for divorce from Alex faster than you'd believe. It was clear as day that whatever we had was buried under lies and betrayal. Plus, with the mansion and that apartment now legally mine, I had the grounds to kick him out. "You need to leave," I told him, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "The apartment, it's mine now. You and your new family need to find somewhere else." Alex tried to argue, his face red with anger and frustration. "You can't just throw us out. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem anymore." "You made your choices, Alex," I shot back, tired of his excuses, tired of the drama. He left, cursing under his breath, and that was that. He and his second family started hopping from one rental to another. I heard through the grapevine that it wasn't going well for him, but that piece of news didn't stir anything in me anymore. Adjusting to the quiet after the storm of betrayal and legal battles was no easy feat, but I found solace in the familiar walls of the mansion, now truly mine. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, as I was enjoying a rare moment of peace in the garden, that Sarah showed up, looking more worn down than I'd ever seen her. "Hey," she called out, her voice lacking its usual bite. "Can we talk?" I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands. "Sure, Sarah. What's on your mind?" She shuffled her feet, looking anywhere but at me. "I'm in a bit of a bind. The debts, they're piling up, and She choked on her words, the bravado that had defined her now gone. I crossed my arms, the weight of her past actions hanging between us. "You're asking me for money." "It's not just for me. I've got nowhere else to turn," she admitted, finally meeting my gaze. The part of me that had endured her laughter, her scorn, wanted to turn her away. But standing there, I realized that holding on to anger would only weigh me down. "Sarah, I can't help you. Not after everything." Her face fell, the last shred of hope vanishing. I get it. I was horrible to you and Mom. I just thought, maybe it's time you faced the consequences of your actions." "Like I had to," I said, not unkindly. "You need to figure this out on your own." She nodded, a resigned acceptance in her posture. "Yeah, I guess I do." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work, reconnecting with friends, and slowly rebuilding the life that had been upended. The mansion, once a battleground of familial strife, began to feel like a home again. I found joy in small things, like the way the morning light filtered through the windows or the laughter of friends gathered in the newly renovated kitchen. Alex and his new family, Sarah and her debts, became distant echoes of a life I had once been a part of. In letting go, I found peace and a sense of freedom I hadn't known I was missing.
My world came crashing down that fateful evening. The words I overheard pierced my soul like daggers, shattering the illusion I had clung to for nearly 2 decades. As I stood frozen in the hallway, the muffled voices of my husband, Carl, and my stepson, Dean, echoed with treacherous clarity. "Once Dean graduates, we can finally cut her loose." Carl's callous whisper sent chills down my spine. "She's served her purpose and we won't need her or her money anymore." Dean's nonchalant reply crushed what little hope remained in my heart. "Sounds good, Dad. It's been a long con, but we played her perfectly." Their words hung heavy in the air, a cruel reminder of the deceit that had shrouded my life for years. I stumbled back, my legs trembling, as the realization hit me like a freight train. Carl and Dean had been using me all this time, exploiting my love and resources for their own selfish gains. Memories flooded my mind. Moments I had once cherished, now tainted by the bitter truth. The first time Carl had swept me off my feet, with his charming smile and promises of a happy family life after my divorce. The way he had introduced me to his young son, Dean, and how I had embraced the role of a loving stepmother, determined to give them both the stability they craved. Little did I know, their affection was a mere facade, a carefully crafted ruse to lure me into their web of lies. As the years passed, the cracks in our relationship became more apparent, but I had chosen to ignore them, blinded by an unwavering commitment to our supposed family. Carl's subtle manipulations, his constant need for financial support under the guise of building a better future for us all. Dean's growing indifference towards me, the once affectionate child, now distant and aloof. The signs had been there all along, but I had been too naive, too trusting to see the truth. Tears streamed down my face as I retreated to the sanctity of my bedroom, my sanctuary now tainted by the betrayal that lingered in every corner. I cried not only for the life I had lost, but also for the person I had become, a pawn in their twisted game, a means to an end. As the shock subsided, a newfound determination took root within me. I would not be a victim any longer. It was time to take back control, to reclaim the dignity they had stolen from me. With quiet resolve, I began to formulate a plan, a blueprint for my liberation from the shadows of deceit that had encompassed my existence for far too long. As I lay awake that night, my mind drifted back to the fateful day when I first met Carl. It was a time of vulnerability, a period of transition after my divorce from my first husband, Jack. I was emotionally drained, struggling to find my footing in the aftermath of a broken marriage. Carl had appeared like a beacon of hope, a charming and supportive figure who promised to mend my shattered heart. With his warm smile and reassuring words, he swept me off my feet, offering the stability and companionship I so desperately craved. "Let me take care of you, Marla," he had whispered, his voice like velvet. "You've been through so much. It's time for you to be cherished the way you deserve." Blinded by his charisma and my own vulnerability, I had fallen for his act, hook, line, and sinker. Little did I know that beneath the facade of kindness lurked a master manipulator, a man driven by greed and selfishness. When Carl introduced me to his son Dean, a shy and seemingly well-behaved child, I embraced the role of a stepmother wholeheartedly. I poured my heart and soul into nurturing this broken family, determined to create a loving and supportive environment for us all. "I promise to be the best mom you could ever hope for," I had told the wide-eyed boy, pulling him into a warm embrace. Dean had nodded silently, his small arms wrapping around me with a hesitant affection that gradually grew stronger over time. Or so I had thought. In hindsight, the signs of their true intentions had been there from the beginning, but I had been too blinded by love and hope to see them. Carl's constant need for financial assistance, his insistence that I quit my job to focus on being a homemaker, it had all been part of his grand scheme. A happy family needs a strong foundation, he would say, his eyes gleaming with what I now recognize as pure manipulation. Let me handle the finances, darling. Your role is to create a loving home for us. And like a fool, I had fallen for his lies, sacrificing my career and independence to cater to his every whim. As for Dean, his transformation from a seemingly affectionate child to a cold and indifferent young man had been gradual yet unmistakable. The once loving hugs and eager conversations had given way to curt nods and disinterested grunts. "Leave him be," Carl would say whenever I expressed concern. "He's just going through a phase. Boys will be boys." But the truth was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Dean's detachment was not a phase, but a calculated move, a part of the grand deception orchestrated by him and his father. As the memories flooded back, I felt a surge of rage coursing through my veins. How could I have been so blind, so trusting? These men, the very people I'd poured my heart and soul into, had been using me all along, exploiting my love and resources for their own selfish gains. Tears of anger and betrayal stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. No more tears, I vowed. From this moment on, I would fight back, reclaiming the life and dignity they had stolen from me. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I would not rest until justice was served. In the days that followed my devastating discovery, I found myself hyper-aware of every interaction, every word uttered by Carl and Dean. What had once been mere background noise now carried weight, each statement and action a potential clue to the depths of their betrayal. It was during one of our family dinners that the first crack in their facade appeared. As we sat around the table, Carl cleared his throat, his expression one of feigned concern. "Marla, dear, I've been meaning to discuss something with you," he began, his tone sickly sweet. "It seems our finances have taken a bit of a hit lately, and I may need to dip into your savings to keep us afloat." My heart sank at his words, but I maintained a calm exterior, determined not to reveal the tempest raging within me. "Of course, honey," I lied, forcing a smile. "Whatever you need to do to keep our family secure." Dean remained silent throughout the exchange, his eyes downcast as he shoveled food into his mouth, seemingly disinterested in the conversation. Little did they know that I had already begun my own investigation, meticulously combing through our financial records and uncovering a trail of deception that stretched back years. Carl's investments and business ventures, all smoke and mirrors, designed to siphon my hard-earned savings into his own pockets. As the days progressed, the instances of their disregard for my well-being became more blatant. Carl would frequently dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand, while Dean would openly ignore my attempts at conversation, preferring to bury his nose in his phone or disappear into his room for hours on end. "He's just going through a phase," Carl would repeat, his worn-out excuse falling flat against the weight of my newfound skepticism. It was during one of these tense silences that I stumbled upon the final piece of the puzzle, a stack of legal documents, buried beneath a pile of Carl's papers. My heart raced as I pored over the pages, my suspicions confirmed in black and white. Carl had been meticulously manipulating the paperwork, attributing my assets and investments to his name, effectively stripping me of my financial independence and autonomy. It was a calculated move, a slow and steady erosion of my resources, all in preparation for the day when he and Dean would finally cut me loose, as they had so callously put it. In that moment, any lingering doubt I harbored evaporated. These men, the very people I had loved and trusted, were nothing more than parasites, feeding off my generosity and love for their own selfish gains. As I clutched the damning documents in my trembling hands, a newfound resolve took root within me. I would no longer be a victim, cowering in the shadows of their deceit. It was time to take action, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and exact a fitting retribution upon those who had so cruelly betrayed me. With steely determination, I began to document every encounter, every conversation, and every financial transaction. I would build an ironclad case against them, leaving no room for doubt or denial. And when the time was right, I would strike, unleashing the full force of my fury upon these traitors who had dared to call themselves family. With each passing day, the emotional and financial strain of living under the same roof as my deceivers grew more oppressive. Carl's demands for money became increasingly frequent, his excuses more flimsy and transparent. "Business has been slow, sweetheart," he would say, his hand resting on my shoulder in a mockery of affection. "I need to dip into our savings again to keep things afloat." I would nod silently, my jaw clenched, as I watched him siphon away my hard-earned nest egg, feeding his insatiable greed with callous disregard for the future I had envisioned for myself. Dean, for his part, remained aloof and indifferent, his nose perpetually buried in his phone or his attention focused on his studies. It was as if he had already written me off, discarding me like a used toy in anticipation of the day when I would no longer serve his purposes. It was during one of these tense encounters that I made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events from which there would be no turning back. Quietly, without arousing suspicion, I sought out legal counsel, determined to understand my rights and options. The lawyer's name was Jacob, a sharp-eyed man in his late 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor that instantly put me at ease. As I poured out the sordid details of my situation, his expression remained impassive, though a flicker of sympathy crossed his features. "What you're describing is financial abuse, plain and simple," he said, his voice low and grave. "But you have options, Mrs. Carter. We can help you reclaim what's rightfully yours and protect your interests moving forward." With Jacob's guidance, I began to meticulously document every encounter, every conversation, and every financial transaction. I installed hidden cameras and voice recorders, capturing the evidence I needed to build an ironclad case against Carl and Dean. The process was emotionally draining, but I persevered, fueled by a burning desire for justice and retribution. I would no longer be the meek, trusting fool they had taken me for. I was a woman reborn, a phoenix rising from the ashes of their deceit. As the weeks ticked by, the tension in our household became palpable, a suffocating miasma of distrust and resentment. Carl grew increasingly agitated by my newfound distance, his once smooth facade cracking under the weight of his own paranoia. "What's gotten into you lately, Marla?" he would demand, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You've been acting strange, distant." I would simply shrug, offering a placating smile that concealed the fury simmering beneath the surface. "Just tired, that's all," I would lie, relishing the flicker of doubt that crossed his features. Dean, too, began to take notice of the shift in our dynamic, his brow furrowed in confusion as he observed the subtle power struggle unfolding before his eyes. Little did they know that with each passing day, I was inching closer to my goal. The day when I would finally break free from their toxic grip and reclaim the life they had so callously stolen from me. As the countdown to Dean's college graduation loomed ever closer, I knew my window of opportunity was rapidly shrinking. It was time to finalize my exit strategy, to gather my resources and prepare for the final act of this sordid drama. And when the curtain fell, there would be no encore, only the sweet, sweet taste of justice and retribution. In the days leading up to Dean's college graduation, the atmosphere in our home grew increasingly tense, a suffocating cloud of unspoken resentment and suspicion hanging over our every interaction. Carl's demands for money became more insistent, his excuses more flimsy and transparent with each passing day. "Business is really struggling, dear," he would say, his hand resting on my shoulder in a mockery of affection. "I need to dip into our savings again to keep things afloat." I would nod silently, my jaw clenched as I watched him siphon away my hard-earned nest egg, feeding his insatiable greed with callous disregard for the future I had once envisioned for myself. Dean, for his part, remained aloof and indifferent, his nose perpetually buried in his phone or his attention focused on his studies. It was as if he had already written me off, discarding me like a used toy in anticipation of the day when I would no longer serve his purposes. Yet, beneath my calm exterior, a storm was brewing, a tempest of rage and determination that had been steadily building since the moment I discovered their treachery. With each passing day, I grew more resolute, more focused on the endgame that had consumed my every waking thought. I maintained a facade of ignorance, attending to the daily routines and chores that had once defined my existence, all the while secretly finalizing my escape plan. Piece by piece, I gathered the evidence, the resources, and the fortitude I would need to break free from their toxic grip once and for all. As the date of Dean's graduation drew ever closer, I could sense Carl's excitement growing, his eyes alight with a gleam of smug satisfaction that made my skin crawl. In his mind, the finish line was in sight, the day when he and his son would finally be rid of me, free to bask in the spoils of their deceit without the burden of my presence. Little did he know that I had been one step ahead all along, carefully laying the groundwork for his downfall with each calculated move. The night before the graduation ceremony, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing with the weight of the decisions I had made. There would be no turning back from this point, no chance for reconciliation or forgiveness. I was about to burn bridges that had once been the foundation of my life, severing ties with the men who had so callously betrayed me. Yet as I gazed at Carl's sleeping form beside me, I felt no regret, no pangs of sentimentality or nostalgia. The man I had once loved was long gone, replaced by a hollow shell of greed and manipulation that had stripped me of my dignity and self-worth. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the curtains, I rose from the bed, my movements silent and purposeful. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of months of careful planning and unwavering determination. With a steely resolve, I gathered my belongings, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was not a retreat, but a calculated strike, a surgical strike that would leave my tormentors reeling in the wake of my departure. As I stepped out into the cool morning air, a sense of liberation washed over me, a weight lifting from my shoulders with each stride. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, unburdened by the shackles of deceit that had bound me for far too long. And as the sun rose over the horizon, casting its warm glow upon my newfound freedom, I couldn't help but smile. The game was over, and I had won. The day of Dean's college graduation dawned bright and sunny, a cruel mockery of the storm that was about to be unleashed upon my unsuspecting tormentors. As I settled into my seat in the auditorium, surrounded by beaming families and proud graduates, a sense of calm washed over me. This was it, the moment I had been meticulously planning for, the catalyst that would set my grand scheme into motion. Carl and Dean were oblivious to my presence, their attention focused solely on the stage as the ceremony commenced. I watched them from afar, taking note of their smug expressions, their casual disregard for the woman they had so callously used and discarded. As the graduates' names were called one by one, a hush fell over the crowd, punctuated by thunderous applause and cheers. When Dean's name was announced, Carl leapt to his feet, whooping and hollering like a man possessed, his arms raised in triumph. It was a sickening display, one that only served to further solidify my resolve. These men, these parasites who had leached off my love and resources for years, would soon learn the true meaning of consequence. As the ceremony drew to a close and the graduates filed out, I remained rooted in my seat, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and adrenaline. Carl and Dean made their way towards the exit, deep in conversation, their faces alight with smug satisfaction. It was then that I made my move. Rising from my seat, I approached them with a purposeful stride, my expression one of steely determination. Carl's brow furrowed as he caught sight of me, his mouth opening to speak, but I cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't bother," I said, my voice low and unwavering. "I know everything, Carl. Every lie, every manipulation, every scheme you and your son have concocted to bleed me dry." Dean's face paled, his eyes widening in shock as the realization of my words sank in. Carl, ever the practiced liar, attempted to brush off my accusation with a dismissive chuckle. "Marla, darling, what on earth are you talking about?" he began, but I silenced him with a withering glare. "Save it," I spat, reaching into my purse and retrieving a thick envelope. "I have all the evidence right here. Bank statements, audio recordings, legal documents. You've been playing me for a fool for years, and it ends today." Carl's face contorted with rage, his mask of affability crumbling as he lunged towards me. "You stupid bye. I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you," a deep voice rumbled from behind me. I turned to see Jacob, my lawyer, flank two burly security guards. Their presence alone was enough to give Carl pause, his bluster deflating as he realized the precarious position he now found himself in. "Mrs. Carter has made her decision," Jacob continued, his tone brooking no argument. She's separating her assets from yours, effective immediately. Any attempt to contest it or retaliate will be met with swift legal action." Carl opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips as he took in the severity of the situation. He was trapped, ensnared in the very web of deceit he had so carefully woven over the years. With a resigned slump of his shoulders, he turned to me, his eyes burning with impotent fury. "You'll regret this, Marla," he hissed. "Mark my words." But his threats fell on deaf ears. I had already won, and there was nothing he could do to stop the wheels of justice from turning. As I walked away, leaving Carl and Dean to stew in the wreckage of their own making, a sense of liberation washed over me. The shackles of their deceit had finally been broken, and I was free to reclaim the life and dignity they had stolen from me. And as the warm sun caressed my face, I couldn't help but smile. Justice, at long last, had been served. The days following my public confrontation with Carl and Dean were a whirlwind of activity. No sooner had I walked away from the graduation ceremony, leaving them sputtering in impotent rage, than the true weight of my actions began to sink in. I had burned the bridge, torched the very foundation upon which my life had been built for nearly 2 decades. There was no going back, no chance for reconciliation or forgiveness. I had exposed the ugly truth of their betrayal, and in doing so, set into motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of our lives. It was late that evening when my phone rang, the familiar number flashing on the screen like a harbinger of the storm to come. With a steadying breath, I answered, steeling myself for the onslaught. "You've made a grave mistake, Marla." Carl's voice crackled through the receiver, laced with a barely contained fury that sent a shiver down my spine. "Did you really think you could just walk away like that, after everything we've built together?" I scoffed at his words, my resolve unwavering. "We built nothing, Carl. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed facade designed to bleed me dry. But the game is over now, and I've won." His response was a guttural growl, a primal sound that betrayed the depths of his rage. "You think you've won? You stupid, naive woman. You have no idea what you've done, what you've cost me and my son." I could picture him pacing like a caged animal, his knuckles white with the strain of gripping the phone. "I'll make you pay for this, Marla. Mark my words, I'll make your life a living hell." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, the sound foreign and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "Is that a threat, Carl? Because if it is, you'd better be prepared to back it up. I have a team of lawyers and enough evidence to bury you and your precious son for what you've done." There was a moment of silence, a pregnant pause that hung heavy between us. Then a low chuckle, dripping with disdain. "You really think you've got it all figured out, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, sweetheart. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. You may have won the battle, but the war has just begun." With that ominous declaration, the line went dead, leaving me to ponder the weight of his words. Was it merely a hollow threat, the desperate bluster of a man backed into a corner? Or was there truth to his vow, a promise of retaliation that would haunt my every step? In that moment, I realized that my journey was far from over. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, with battles to be fought and demons to be faced. But I was no longer the meek, trusting woman who had been so easily manipulated and exploited. I was a warrior, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the hard-won lessons of life. And as I set about the task of rebuilding my life from the ashes of their lies, I vowed to face whatever came my way with the same steely resolve that had carried me this far. The first order of business was to sever the remaining ties that bound me to Carl and Dean, to excise their toxic influence from every corner of my existence. I reached out to mutual friends and family members, laying bare the sordid truth of their schemes and the depths of their deceit. The reactions were a mixed bag. Some expressed shock and disbelief, while others admitted to harboring suspicions all along. But one thing was clear. The facade had been shattered, and Carl and Dean were left exposed, their true natures laid bare for all to see. As word spread like wildfire through our once tightly knit social circle, the backlash was swift and severe. Friendships were severed, invitations rescinded, and the once respected father and son found themselves ostracized, cast out from the very community they had sought to exploit. It was a harsh punishment, but one that paled in comparison to the pain and suffering they had inflicted upon me. As I watched their world crumble around them, a sense of vindication washed over me, a heady cocktail of relief and triumph that left me feeling both empowered and humbled. For in the end, justice had been served, not by my hand alone, but by the collective weight of truth and consequence. And as I turned my gaze towards the future, a future free from the shackles of their deceit, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. The months that followed my escape from Carl and Dean's clutches were a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. With their toxic influence finally excised from my life, I found myself embarking on a journey of rebirth, shedding the shackles of my past like a snake shedding its skin. I left the city that had been the backdrop to my years of suffering, trading the familiar streets and haunted memories for the promise of a fresh start elsewhere. In a new town, with new surroundings, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying until it was gone. Gone were the constant reminders of my betrayal, the whispers and sidelong glances that had dogged my every step in the aftermath of my confrontation with Carl and Dean. Here, in this unfamiliar place, I was free to reinvent myself, to reclaim the person I had been before their deceit had tainted my very existence. And so, I threw myself headlong into the task of rebuilding, pouring my energy and focus into rediscovering the passions and ambitions that had once defined me. I returned to the workforce, taking a job that reignited the flames of my long-dormant career aspirations. With each day, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident, more alive. It was during this period of rebirth that the news reached me, a whisper on the grapevine that quickly grew into a roar of schadenfreude. Dean, the once promising young man whose future had been the centerpiece of his father's machinations, had dropped out of college. The reasons were murky, but the underlying truth was clear. Without my financial support, without the steady stream of resources they had so callously exploited, their grand plans had crumbled to dust. The very future they had sought to secure through deceit and manipulation had slipped through their grasping fingers, undone by their own greed and hubris. As for Carl, the once charming manipulator found himself a pariah, shunned and ostracized by the very social circles he had once moved through with such ease. His attempts to rebuild his reputation and regain his footing were met with scorn and derision, a testament to the depths of his betrayal and the enduring power of truth. In the wake of their downfall, a part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, a vindictive pleasure in witnessing the karmic consequences of their actions. But that fleeting sense of triumph was quickly overshadowed by a deeper, more profound realization. I was free. Free from the shackles of their deceit, free from the weight of their lies, and free to chart my own course, unencumbered by the baggage of the past. It was a heady, intoxicating feeling, one that filled me with a sense of possibility and potential that I had long since forgotten. As the months turned into years, the details of my ordeal began to fade, the sharp edges of pain and betrayal softening into the hazy recollections of a life left behind. Carl, once the center of my universe, became little more than a footnote in the grand narrative of my existence, a cautionary tale, a reminder of the depths to which the human heart can sink when consumed by greed and selfishness. And yet, even as the scars of his treachery faded, I found myself forever changed by the experience, tempered by the fires of adversity and forged into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. The woman who had once been so easily manipulated and exploited was gone, replaced by a warrior, a survivor who had stared into the abyss of deceit and emerged victorious, her dignity and self-worth intact. As I looked back on the winding path that had brought me to this point, I felt a swell of pride and gratitude, pride in my own strength and resilience, and gratitude for the hard-won lessons that had shaped me into the woman I had become. And as I turned my gaze towards the future, a future brimming with possibility and promise, I couldn't help but smile. For in the end, it was not Carl or Dean who had emerged triumphant, but me, the woman who had dared to stand up to their lies and reclaim her life, one courageous step at a time.